everyone to our first session in the AI and Consciousness series. I'm Susie Paulik Babka. I am faculty in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, and I'm also the Element Chair of Technology and Humanities here at the Humanities Center. I want to thank Brian Clack and Lindy Villa for their support today. They are the director and assistant director of the Humanities Center, respectively. This promises to be an exciting series on the nature of consciousness. Consciousness, of course, comprises perception, experience, awareness, and interdependence, discusses the nature of relationship. The great physicist Max Planck, who rescued Einstein from the tedium of a patent office in Bern, Switzerland, who coined the term quantum, considered the father of quantum mechanics, insisted that the mind is the matrix of matter. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter derivative from consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything we regard as existing postulates consciousness. So asking the questions of consciousness means bringing together all academic disciplines to ask questions of what is fundamental to the nature of existence itself. So I will want to get right to our speakers today. I'm really excited to welcome two dynamic scientists. The first is Stuart Hameroff, MD, Emeritus Professor of Anesthesiology and Psychology, and Director of the Center of Consciousness Studies, an attending anesthesiologist at Banner University Medical Centers at the University of Arizona in Tucson. He is zoomed in for us. He received his BS from the University of Pittsburgh and the MD from Hahnemann University Hospital, now Drexel University College of Medicine. He is one of the boldest researchers in the field of consciousness studies. He's collaborated with Sir Roger Penrose of Oxford University and, of course, the 2021 Nobel laureate in physics. He has championed quantum models of consciousness centered on the computational capabilities and orchestrated quantum collapse in neuronal microtubules. Like any original and paradigm-shaking theory, this has been met with substantial skepticism from the philosophical, quantum, medical, and biological communities. That he and Dr. Penrose have received such strong reactions indicate that they are probing the heart of an important problem, the nature of consciousness. Dr. Hameroff has been a principal organizer of the annual meetings toward a science of consciousness since their inception in 1994. He has written or edited 6 books, several hundred scientific articles and book chapters, lectured on 6 continents, appeared in the film What the Bleep Do We Know?, numerous TV shows about consciousness on the BBC, PBS, Discovery, National Geographic, and the History Channel. And of course, our own professor, Dr. Daniel Sheehan, received his BS in chemistry from Santa Clara and his PhD in physics from UC Irvine, investigating the phase space development of ions in plasma using laser-induced fluorescence techniques. His postdoctoral work at Irvine focused on new radio frequency techniques applicable to thermonuclear physics. He's been a member of the faculty here at USD since 1989. His research interests include the second law of thermodynamics, retrocausation, nanotechnology, planetary formation, and plasma physics. Over the last 2 decades, he has investigated theoretical and experimental challenges to the second law of thermodynamics. He co-authored the first mainstream scientific treatise on second law challenges and organized the first international conferences on the subject. He has co-authored and edited several books and conference proceedings on these subjects. Retrocausation, of course, is the notion that that effect can precede cause, which basically says that time can move in several different directions, not just one direction. And so this is actually something that relates to his interest in consciousness studies. He has been part of the series that Dr. Hameroff organizes for several years. And so please welcome both Dr. Hameroff and Dr. Sheehan.
Thank you. Hello. You want me to go ahead? Let's see if I can share my screen. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to show some slides here. Can you see that?
Yes.
So the topic is artificial intelligence, AI, and consciousness. And this is a very important topic. I have to admit from the get-go that I'm a bit of a skeptic about whether consciousness can be produced by computers, artificial intelligence. But to get there, let me just start with this slide, which we take it for granted that when we open our eyes, the world out there appears inside our head, Bing. And I'll use Bing to mean conscious experience as opposed to something which may be cognitive, but not necessarily involving awareness or experience. And it's addressed in a number of ways. Neuroscientists probe the brain with electrodes of various sorts. Here's a roboticist in artificial intelligence person designing a computer that would hopefully, presumably, be conscious. Artists try to capture reality. Physicists try to understand reality. The psychiatrists, anesthesiologists like me who study how anesthesia takes away consciousness, meditators, and philosophers. So the consciousness has traditionally been likened to the most current information processing technology, going back to the Greeks, for example, with memory being a seal ring in wax. And, we've gone through steam engines and telegraph switching circuits and holograms, and currently the computer for the last 70 years. And that's based on the idea that the brain is a computer of neurons, that neurons are connected by synapses. And it's based on the idea that the neuron is what's called a Hodgkin-Huxley integrate and fire neuron, which is basically an algorithmic process. So on the left, we see a bunch of neurons, and we can sort of make out connections between them called synapses. And on the right, you see a computer switching matrix with nodes, which are supposed to represent or model or be similar to neurons connected by synapses. And what Hodgkin and Huxley did was in 1952, exactly 70 years ago, realized that the neuron shown here has a cell body and dendrites which receive synaptic inputs from other neurons and mediate signals along their surface by ion channels and integrate these the potentials caused by the inputs to a threshold at the what's called the axon initiation segment here. And the story is that when the membrane potential reaches a critical threshold here, there's a spike, a sudden all or none transition, and we go from kind of analog to digital and propagate a signal very rapidly to the next neuron. And this is an all or none signal, so it's kind of a digital signal. So we go from analog to digital, and the digital spikes or firings are taken as bits in computers. And so that led to the analogy that the brain is a computer of neurons, because this does fulfill what would be called a threshold logic device in computers. So the idea is that the integration occurs in the dendrites and cell body, and then results in a firing. And so sequences of integrate and fire, integrate and fire, integrate and fire are hooked together to give a computer. And that's the basic idea in artificial intelligence, that this would lead to, or the idea that the brain is a computer and that a computer could lead to consciousness, since there is no fundamental difference between the brain and a computer based on this idea of the integrate and fire neuron. And so it's based on the Hodgkin-Huxley integrate and fire neuron, and which is algorithmic, which means it's mathematical. So you take the inputs, and when they reach a threshold, you get a firing, an output, and it's deterministic, machine-like, and it comes too late. I'm not going to show the slides about the whole brain, but inputs coming into the sensory systems take about 300 to 500 milliseconds for the activity that seems to correlate with consciousness. And yet we often act within 100 milliseconds, leading to the conclusion that consciousness is epiphenomenal. It comes too late. And therefore, there's no free will. We act non-consciously and have this illusion after the fact that consciousness was in control. And Daniel's done a lot of great work on retrocausation and backward time effects. And I got into this from reading Roger Penrose's book, The Emperor's New Mind, where he talked about backward time effects in the brain accounting for Libet's famous backward time effects. But that's not the main topic today. The problem with this brain as computer idea is that the algorithmic, besides it coming too late, is that there's no room for variability, really. There's no consciousness, there's no room for a role for consciousness, creativity, intuition, insight, free will, much less consciousness per se, the so-called hard problem. And accordingly, as I said, because it comes too late, consciousness is considered epiphenomenal in modern neuroscience and philosophy. And we are, as Thomas Huxley famously said, conscious automata, merely helpless spectators along for the ride. And this is an old video game, Pac-Man, where the guy on the left was manipulated by a joystick to move around this grid and swallow up these cookie guys or whatever they are. And I kind of missed the boat on video games, but I played this at one point a little bit. And so in this case, the agent, the Pac-Man, is being manipulated by somebody running the joystick. And the idea is that in modern neuroscience and AI, actually, if you follow the actual timing, is that we act by our non-conscious autopilot, our inner zombie, if you will, and have a false illusion. And therefore, we're merely helpless spectators along for the ride. Well, this would be unfortunate, but the only way around it really is the physics of quantum physics with backward time effects that Daniel's been working on, Roger Penrose has been working on. But let's take a closer look at the brain, because it may be that we can actually see evidence and that things are not as bleak as they appear in terms of free will. So this is what is predicted by the Hodgkin-Huxley equation, the predicted algorithmic behavior. So over here, we have a graph of integrate and fire, where the gray would be the integration in the dendrite and soma, reaching a threshold which causes firing in the red. So integrate and firing. And the threshold is fairly narrow. If you look at it here, you see there's a narrow threshold and a very narrow time window. So this is algorithmic. It just follows the rules accordingly. And so it takes all the inputs and gives you a specific output. So you can see that if that's the case, there's no room for consciousness to change perception or actions. And the slope of the spike of the firing is presumably because the ion channels are presumed to open sequentially over here, this one and this one and this one. And so the spike is tilted. However, things are not necessarily like that. In this very excellent paper in 2006, Nandorf, Wolf, and Volgashev studied awake cats. They put electrodes in pyramidal cells of pyramidal neurons of the brains of awake cats, and they found something completely different than from what was predicted by Hodgkin-Huxley. And this doesn't apply to all neurons, but it applies to these, at least to the pyramidal neurons, which are the most likely sources of consciousness, and in my opinion and others' opinion. And what they actually see is a very wide threshold, and a very wide threshold and a wide temporal variability. So you see that the spikes come off at a variety, almost a 10 millivolt range, and therefore there's variability. There's some non-computable factor which regulates these firings or spikes. So it's not just the membrane mediating the inputs to a given output. Something is either varying the threshold or varying something else, so that there's deviation from this algorithmic Hodgkin-Huxley behavior. And this non-computable factor regulates firings and spikes, and would be the perfect place for consciousness to come in and take over behavior, for example, firing. So the Bing, the consciousness, could be in whatever mechanism causes deviation from Hodgkin and Huxley algorithmic behavior. And I use the term non-computable because that was the term that Roger Penrose used in his book to kind of as kind of a pushback against the AI idea that consciousness was nothing more than a computation. He argued that through Gödel's theorem, which involves, for example, a mathematical theorem to be proven needs an outside agent, particularly a conscious mathematician, to decide if it's true or not. The theorem can't prove itself. So needs something non-computable. And Roger used that to argue that there must be something non-computable outside of the system required for consciousness. And what that was turned out to be quantum physics that we won't go into very much today. But the point is that there's something that could be the source of consciousness could be what is causing deviation from Hodgkin-Huxley behavior. So where would it be coming from? Well, if it's outside the neuron, it would affect the membrane potential, and we would see that in the membrane potential. So it seems the most likely source would be from a deeper level, from inside the neuron, because Hodgkin-Huxley dealt only with membrane effects. So if we look at a neuron, here's the dendrites and cell body, and here's the axon. And these structures inside are cytoskeletal structure called microtubules, which I'm going to argue could be the source for this deviation. And here they are, the dendrites, and they're actually the same size as here. So you can imagine these are further back. And they're also different configuration. They're interrupted here, and here they're continuous. And here's a synapse coming in from another neuron. So it could be that the Bing, the consciousness, is coming from dendrites, inside dendrites, from these microtubules, for example, which could alter the threshold and affect the behavior. So, for example, if you're going to do something based on inputs, and then something, your gut feeling or instinct or divine guidance or something causes you to do something different, slightly different, it could be that it's consciousness coming from a deeper level, and that consciousness could even be connected to a deeper level of the universe, which was what Penrose suggested, to the space-time geometry for what he called Platonic values. But for the moment, let's confine ourselves to the neuron and see, is it feasible for consciousness, for deviation in consciousness to come from inside the neuron and the microtubules? Well, before I go there, let me say that this is a little bit analogous to something in AI, and I'm no expert in AI, but I've been fascinated by one aspect of it, at least, which is deep learning, which, as I understand, the last 20 years or so has been one of the major driving forces in advances in AI, as well as a back propagation, where signals also can go backwards through a network, possibly also through microtubules. But in deep learning, well, back propagation is one, so you have signals going backward in the AI network, and that could be happening. It doesn't happen at the membrane, but it could happen. Well, it's likely to happen in the microtubules inside. And the other thing is deep learning, which involves additional hidden layers in a series of networks. So here are a series of computer networks interconnected, and you can imagine that they've added extra layers in between these layers, and that gives you interesting. So here's a simple neural network, and then you add a deep learning network by adding extra layers, hidden layers, in between. And Anil Seth at Sussex has done some experiments with this, and he found that when he added additional layers in a cognitive task, he found that you would get these weird mergers of imagery. For example, seeing puppy dogs in a plate of spaghetti by having an additional hidden network that had puppy dogs in a network otherwise processing spaghetti, or the other way around. And this has been commented on that this is similar what happens in psychedelic experiences. And so maybe that's due to some hidden layer or something deeper affecting conscious cognition. Here's another one where eyeballs appear all over the place. So this is a merger of different contexts by adding hidden layers. So it could be that you could think of the microtubules inside the neuron as additional layers, but at a deeper scale, at a smaller scale inside the neuron. And this would be very efficient because you wouldn't waste time, and it would have the effect at every layer. So this is one way to look at it, that the microtubules and the cytoskeletal processes act like hidden layers in deep learning neural networks. So that's a possibility. So if we look at whether microtubules, what they actually are, this is something that I worked on for a long time before I read Roger's book and realized that we needed quantum computers. But they're smaller and have a much greater capacity for information processing at the smaller level. And so I'm going to not go on much longer. I just want to wrap up with a couple points here, and that is to say that this deeper layer might be a clue, and it may not just be one deeper layer or one hidden layer at a smaller scale, but it's looking more and more like that the brain is not so much a computer of simple neurons, of simple integrate and fire neurons, but more of a scale invariant hierarchy, a hierarchical system. And this has been talked about for many years. And if we start here with a neuron, this is a pyramidal neuron, and it operates roughly in hertz, like the EEG range. And if you go to the left, you would get networks and then networks of neurons and larger scale, slower processes. And a lot of people have looked at the brain as a hierarchical system going upward from neurons. But I think what we need to do is go inward, deeper, smaller, faster into the quantum realm, into the microtubules, networks of microtubules, into tubulin dipoles, and then from there into the tubulin itself, and into these quantum dipoles, and even further, and eventually, according to Roger Penrose, to the fundamental level of the universe. So if we go back to here just to look at the time scale, there's actually evidence for as we go smaller, we get faster. So we know the EEG is like from 0 to 100 hertz, very roughly. But people are discovering much faster vibrations coming out of neurons that I'll talk about in a second. And it looks like in networks of neurons, we're at about 1,000 hertz, kilohertz. If we go down to microtubules, we're into megahertz, a million cycles per second. And then we get into these dipoles, we're into gigahertz, a billion per second. And then terahertz down here, which is actually optical, 10 to the 12th per second. And let me just say that there is evidence for this in microtubules from the work of Anirban Bandipati. I won't take the time to go into this, but he looked at 3 scales of neurons, individual microtubules, and then tubulins, and found self-similar patterns, kind of like a fractal, going from hertz down to kilohertz, megahertz, then kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and terahertz all the way. So 12 orders of magnitude inside the neuron of information processing, which gets you down into the quantum area, which can give you backward time effects and connection to the universe and so forth. And to conclude, I just want to say that this is similar, I've been looking into this lately, to some Eastern philosophical approaches to consciousness, where they have a kind of a similar idea of a scale invariant hierarchy of different levels of awareness. And this is called the koshas, 5 koshas, where you have a physical sheath, and you go deeper into a life force sheath, and then a mental sheath, and then a wisdom sheath, and then the bliss body. And then below that would be Brahman in Indian philosophy. And I've been toying with the idea that this may relate to the hierarchy that I just discussed, and the physical sheath would be kind of like at the level of neuron with hertz, and we go deeper into kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and then terahertz, and then further down into the fundamental level of the universe. So this is all conjecture, of course, but it's interesting that these philosophical systems in the East and West have been around for a long, long time, and we may be seeing connections to the science. So let me just conclude there, and I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks, but I'm pretty skeptical about AI as it presently stands, leading to consciousness. There are some things that could be done to take advantage of this type of hierarchical system, but in terms of just building faster classical computers, I remain to be convinced that that's possible. For one thing, consciousness comes too late, doesn't address the hard problem, and there's no room for variability and free will. So I'll stop there and be happy to take questions and hear what Daniel and others have to say. So thanks very much.
Stuart, I have a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the number of neurons in the brain, which I guess is like 86 billion, roughly 100 billion neurons, each on average with something like 1,000 to 10,000 synaptic connections. And then if you consider these 12 orders of magnitude of calculability per neuron, the computational capacity for the brain seems to be many orders of magnitude greater than the fastest computers at this point. And so at these complexity levels, is it possible that you would start finding new regimes of, quote, computation or behaviors that just simply can't be mimicked by classical computers? What do you think about that?
I think that's a major factor, but that's not the only factor. I think if you believe Roger, and you also need something non-computable, something an outside system that might have platonic values. A lot of people have likened this to a religious, spiritual divine guidance, these platonic values guiding our choices and actions. And when I heard him about this for the first time, that's what I thought. But Roger doesn't let you talk about that. He avoids any talk of religion or anything that might be spiritual. He kind of lets the science speak for itself. But I think that you can make a case for that. But before you even get there, what you say is true, because if you just consider the information capacity of the microtubules versus the brain at the level of neurons. So you mentioned the 86 billion neurons and 1,000 or so, 1,000 to 10,000 synapses at about 100 hertz. That gives you about 10 to the 16th operations per second for the brain. And this was first cited by Hans Moravec in the 80s, an early AI person. And then Ray Kurzweil picked up on it, and with the singularity. And so this 10 to the 16th operations per second. So Kurzweil was saying things like, well, if we have a computer that can do 10 to the 16th operations per second, it will be equivalent to the brain, and therefore will produce consciousness. So, just give us a couple $1 billion more, and we'll have a computer at 10 to the 16th operations per second. And, it'll be conscious. It'll be everything your brain does. And if you have even more money, you can download your consciousness into it and live forever, be immortal. And that was kind of the selling point for AI. Sometimes it was more subtle than that. But the problem is that it doesn't really explain the hard problem. It doesn't explain what consciousness is, other than assuming that it's purely computation and there's nothing else. And that leads to all kinds of problems, including it coming too late. But then when you add so you could argue against what I'm saying, and by arguing, well, when you go down in scale, so and get smaller and smaller, you're becoming more reductionist. And there's a lot of good arguments against reductionism. But if you go down in scale, you get to the quantum level at some point, at least in terahertz, if not before, where you get non-locality and entanglement. and retrocausal effect or retroactive effects, as you know. And so if you get down to that level, then you get non-locality entanglement, and the microtubules in one neuron can entangle with those in other neurons throughout the brain, which I think you need anyway to explain things like cognitive binding and very fast coherent EEG and so forth. So the quantum effect is important for non-locality within the brain, but also among brains, maybe allowing for parapsychology and near-death and out-of-body experiences, and even afterlife become possible if you have non-locality and quantum effects. So it's not just, I mean, I agree with your sentiment that if you consider this incredible increase in information processing capacity and the going down in scale, which you need to do to accommodate all this information, it's not just more complexity. It's that you're getting fundamentally different qualitative aspects of the system, and including quantum non-locality and interconnection over time and space, spatio-temporal. And you know well the temporal non-locality angle. So it's more information processing. But I was studying microtubules for about 20 years, arguing that that information processing was a much greater level inside neurons, and that people in AI who were arguing for the 10 to the 16th were barking up the wrong tree or butting their head against the wall, because it wasn't going to happen. And I was going around to AI and neural network meetings being kind of a thorn in their side or a pain in their somewhere else. And but I thought they needed to consider the cytoskeleton. So I wasn't doing it just for that purpose. But one day somebody said, okay, wise guy, let's say you're right, and there's all this information processing going on inside the neuron. How would that explain consciousness? How would that explain, love, the color pink, joy, taste, the heart, what later become known as the heart problem? And I was a bit stunned, because I realized that they were right, and I was just being more reductionist, and it was kind of a road to nowhere. But fortunately, that same person has recommended I read Roger's book, which I did, and realized that he had a mechanism for consciousness in the collapse of the wave function, in the self-collapse of the wave function, connected to quantum gravity or to the fine scale structure of the universe. And I tried to understand that as best I could, and continue to try to understand it. And he needed a quantum computer which could implement this quantum stuff in the brain, and neurons were way too big. And so I recommended microtubules, suggested microtubules, and he agreed. He liked the concept, and we developed our theory. And as you said, or maybe Susie said, we were criticized and ridiculed because everybody thought the brain's too warm, wet, and noisy. But it turns out that's not the case. And there's quantum biology happening even as we speak, and there's good evidence for that now. And we've recently shown that the quantum effects in microtubules are dampened or inhibited by anesthesia. And we're going to be doing more work along those lines. So it's more information capacity, which also explains how single cell organisms can navigate and do clever things, whether or not they're conscious. And I think they are conscious, actually, but at a much slower frequency, much slower rate. And because of our brain capacity, we can have, let's say, 10 million conscious moments per second, which interfere to give us slower cognitive epochs, whereas a paramecium might have a couple per second. So qualitatively somewhat similar, but not even on the same ballpark in terms of the type of consciousness. So I think this approach is much more feasible, and much more gives much more opportunity to go further and understand what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'm going to set up my talk. I think at this point we'll get some help from Lindy, because the protocol here is a little bit awkward. And then I'll give a handful of slides, and then we can have a discussion with the audience, I hope.
Okay, I don't know how to unscreen share. If you can do that, please do it.
Been done.
Oh, wait, I see it. Stop share. Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Let's see if I can make this go here. Okay. Great. Okay. All right. So Stuart is certainly one of the prime movers in the whole consciousness movement, particularly with his bold ideas and also by organizing these terrific conferences. And I've been going to them for probably 25 years or so. I'm maybe missed the first one, but I've been going regularly and been really inspired by seeing how many different disciplines are interested in this problem. And it's the only conference I've ever gone to where everybody knows exactly what we're talking about, but nobody can define it. And so it's always made it interesting. Even after 25 years, no one's given a good definition for consciousness. But when we start comparing AI to consciousness, I made a list of what I consider to be 6 possible differences by which to discriminate between the two, and maybe propose in the end a new kind of Turing test. So first of all, as Roger and has pointed out, the issue of qualia, the very nature of our experiences are not found in the equations of physics or physiology. And when you see a purple blouse, for instance, that experience cannot be reduced to equations. There's something different about it. It's purely experiential, purely personal. And so the question arises, will AI always be zombie-like, may act like it's human, but never really experience the universe as we do? Secondly, human consciousness, if we think that it's materially based, is based on wetware. It's carbon-based. And currently AI is hardware, semiconductor-based. And I would say that just by the fact that they're made out of different materials, they were probably fundamentally different in the way they might exhibit consciousness. Computers are algorithmic in nature, and as Roger, Penrose, and Stuart have proposed and argued, there seems to be something fundamentally non-algorithmic about consciousness, which sets it apart. And computers are classical in nature currently. The human mind, I would argue, you can make a very good prima facie case that it has to be quantum in nature in some respects. And I'll try to make that argument more clear as we go ahead with the slides. And again, the point I was making with Stuart is that the human mind, if you take what Stuart says to heart, it's not just the computational capacity of 10 to the 16th computations per second, but there are sub-computations going on in the microtubules, which are at even higher frequency, which pushes the computational speed up into something which is truly enormous. But that may not be the defining characteristic. Finally, I'd like to say that I think a defining characteristic of human beings is their ability to access the future. And I'll try to make a clear case for that. And is this a means to discriminate ultimately between a computer AI system and a human being? AI systems are not designed to access the future. And the only clear way that we currently understand to access the future is through quantum processes. So I would argue that if human beings are able to access the future in a reliable way, that is a prima facie case that the mind or consciousness is fundamentally quantum in nature and can do something that maybe AI may not be able to do, at least as we currently understand AI. So this may be a new kind of Turing test, a way to discriminate between AI and human consciousness. How many of you have ever had a premonition? Anybody here? Be honest about it. Jane, you have premonitions from time to time?
Yeah.
I have them on a regular basis. I actually had a premonition of my youngest brother's death a few days before it happened. And nobody but nobody's going to convince me that I didn't. And since then, I have them on a regular basis. I've kind of learned to recognize them as they happen. I'll often see somebody's face that I haven't thought of in years. And when I see their face, I know I'm going to meet them within 3 days, roughly, or find out that they just died. Okay, that's generally what happens. And this happens on a regular basis. Does anyone have any experiences like that, where they have some sort of knowledge about the future that they shouldn't have? No? Okay, let me describe some experiments which demonstrate this. There have been a lot of experiments in precognition over the last 40 years. Here are some of the researchers who've carried them out. These have often been binned into such things as what's called presentiment, knowledge about the future just a few seconds in advance. There's robust evidence for that, and also in remote viewing. But what I'd like to look at is a particular set of experiments that were conducted about 6 years ago by Dale Graff and Patricia Cyrus in 2016. These were presented at one of my quantum retrocausation conferences here at the university. And the experiment is very straightforward, very simple to conceive of. The goal of it is to describe a photograph that appears on page A6 of a particular newspaper in Reading, Pennsylvania, called the Reading Eagle. And this newspaper has what's called an Around the World section on Tuesday. The way the experiment is conducted, on the previous Saturday or Sunday, a viewer, that would be either Dale or Patricia or both, the viewer attempts to mentally access Tuesday's target photograph, conscious or in dream state. Note, the event has not occurred yet, and the photo has not been taken, and the photo has not been chosen to be in the newspaper at that point. The viewer provides sketches, words, and concepts about the target photograph. In other words, tries to imagine what that photograph is going to be and to describe it. The viewer then emails the session results to the tasker by Monday, 9 a.m., a full day before the picture is found in the paper. The event occurs on Monday. So the international event occurs on Monday, and the photo is taken as part of the Associated Press photographs. The Associated Press sends in roughly 5,000 to 10,000 pictures per day. So it's one of those. The editor of the Reading Eagle chooses a single one of those photographs on Monday evening, probably around midnight, to publish on Tuesday morning. Then it is published. The viewer receives feedback, the target photo, after the paper is published, and the viewer may seek additional information after the feedback to amplify the session results. So looking at the timeline in March of 2016, you can see that on Friday, March 12th, the viewer agrees to the session. On Saturday, the precognition session takes place. In other words, the person, typically Patricia, would go into kind of calm her mind and try to imagine what's going to appear on in the paper on Tuesday, the following Tuesday. On Monday, the event occurs. In this case, it's an event in Indonesia. It's photographed by a particular photographer, put on the AP online database, and then the publisher selects it early Tuesday morning. Here's an example of one of the sessions. The event itself is a photograph of a ship being bombed. You can see in the photograph here. Here's the ship, the railing, and water spray as the ship is blown up. Now, the photographer is apparently here, looking at the ship, and makes this photograph. On the Saturday before that evening, here's the picture that Patricia sketches, and it looks like this with two jets coming out. And some of the words she uses to describe it: curved metal, large boat, shipwreck. That event had not occurred, and the photograph was not even possible at that point. Another example, this one was done in dream state by Dale Graff. The words are Patricia Cyrus's. Here's the photograph, Buddhist monks at a congregation. Here's the sketch done on Saturday. And the words, hundreds of people in choir robes, brightly lit concert inside a building. So there are 33 sessions which were performed between February and April of 2016. Independent evaluators ranked 21 of them, roughly 64% of the 33 sessions, as having medium to high degrees of correlation with the target newspaper photographs, which is statistically significant. Even one of these, the chances of being able to guess and draw a picture of a boat bombing 3 days in advance is virtually impossible. It turns out that there are quantum mechanical models that allow for backward in time information propagation. These include two-state vector formalism and also what's called the transactional approach. So I've been investigating this theoretically, trying to understand how these events could possibly be true. And it appears that there's a reasonably good pathway to explain it. The details have not been worked out by any means, but quantum mechanics certainly doesn't forbid it. So classical reality cannot accommodate retrocausation of this sort. In other words, backward information propagation, but quantum mechanics can. And some quantum experiments can be interpreted as retrocausal. So it appears that precognition may be retrocausal, and so it suggests that somehow our minds are in some way quantum mechanical in nature, because classical mechanics can't accommodate this. These discussions were had last summer at a conference I co-hosted here at the university, Quantum Time Machines. This was the first conference ever actually looking at the possibility of building a device that can actually accomplish this kind of task. There was kind of a split opinion among the physicists there. Many thought that quantum mechanics would not allow time backward propagation. Other of us believe so. Experiments would tell the tale, I think, in the end. But if it turns out that quantum mechanics cannot even in principle permit this, then it suggests that since human beings do this, in fact, evidence indicates we do look backward in time, or can look forward in time, then that suggests that maybe the essence of mind is something different from the kinds of matter and phenomena we're normally accustomed to. It is my hope that quantum mechanics will accommodate this, and that we can actually build a quantum time machine at some point. Any questions? Yeah.
So is there any physics that prevents a sort of a circular effect, like, you know,
A closed time loop?
a closed time loop?
No.
Okay.
Those are allowed. As
But
long as it's logically consistent,
Yeah.
there's nothing fundamentally wrong with closed time loops.
Marty McFly causing his parents to meet or something.
A little more sophisticated than that. But yeah, there's nothing that's forbidden about that. It's a question of whether it exists. But it's just mysterious that precognition occurs, and strongly in certain people that they can be that they actually can almost call it up on command. I know both of these researchers, particularly Patricia Cyrus, in these experiments. This is not fraud. It's a real phenomenon. And so the question is, how is it possible? Not is it possible, because it clearly is. So, yeah, Russ.
So I'm not sure if this is a reasonable question. Is there medium of data transmission?
The what?
Is there any speculation about the medium of data transmission?
Yeah, it turns out that it's probably not energy transfer, but when it comes to things like when you have quantum correlations, you can have correlations over non-local distances. In this case, it would not be non-local, but that two events can be correlated in time. In other words, let's say in the future having something happen and it be correlated with something in the present, like an image of a boat exploding or something, is not forbidden. My own belief is that what's really happening is a quantum correlation between your future self and your past self. So yourself on Tuesday or Wednesday, when you find out what the boat looks like exploding, is in your head. And at the same time, 3 days ago, you have the same neurons which are ready to fire, which can be affected subtly by signals propagating backward in time, which can trigger those and give you the same image. That's what I think is really happening.
My first question is about how is the signal transmitted?
Yeah, it's not being transmitted. It's already there. It's transmitting straight in time, not across space.
So are we talking about
Time is a term that's often thrown around. That's a possibility. I don't know if I'd call it that, but the fact that the brain is a non-equilibrium system, the neurons are primed to fire, ready to go. All it takes is a small perturbation for it to occur. And that could be something probably at the quantum level. In other words, at the level of quantum fluctuation, be my guess, that an an ensemble of neurons in the brain in the future, which are timed to fire in a particular manner that creates the image of a boat explosion. If that happens in a let's say, a very strong emotional way, it may be possible for that to trigger a firing of that same pattern of neuronal firings in the past. Because when you look at the equations of physics, in terms of quantum mechanics, you get two solutions, one that propagate forward in time and one that propagates backward in time. The backward propagating signal is normally ignored because it's considered, it's called the advanced potential. It's ignored because it's considered non-causal or acausal or strange. But the physics says that it should be there. And this may be a case where it is. So physics does not forbid this process whatsoever, as far as I can tell. Jane. I think it has to do with a couple of things, and I'd like Stuart to chime in on this too. I think part of it has to do with the complexity and the fact that if there are wave functions associated with thought, these wave functions are probably unique in the universe because the construction of our neuronal systems between human beings is entirely unique. And as a result, if you have a forward and backward time propagating signal, if it's propagating and not even it's propagating in time, but not in space, there would be no decrease in its strength necessarily because it's not spreading out in space. It's simply moving through time. There is nothing for it to absorb. That particular, if that signal is propagating backward in time, there's nothing to absorb it because there's nothing that has its same configuration except itself. And so the only thing that could absorb that backward propagating wave would be your own mind, in which the wave function of your own mind, in which case it could trigger that perhaps. This has a lot to work out. This is kind of a thumbnail sketch of what I think might be happening, but the data speak for themselves. It's a question of, can we understand what's going on? And I think this is a reasonable hypothesis, some kind of a minimum hypothesis. Stuart, what do you think? Are you still there?
Yeah. I think any collapse gives you consciousness. Certainly yours are different than mine, but they can also occur spontaneously in the environment, randomly, and you have to bite the bullet. And it's like if you believe in panpsychism, you have to say that every atom has some kind of consciousness or proto-consciousness. And so for collapse that occur in the, which you might call decoherence otherwise, they would be random and isolated and no memory, no context or meaning, and they're what we call proto-conscious, and they're happening here, there, and everywhere. Kind of like in panpsychism, where everything has a little smidge of consciousness on it. But I think it's a lot better for a number of reasons to say that it's a collapse itself. So metaphorically, this would be like if you go to the symphony and all the musicians are tuning his or her instruments, and you hear like this cacophony of noise of different tones and notes. It's noise. It's annoying, actually. And this is kind of like what the proto-conscious events happening here, there, and everywhere would be. What you need, or what we need, is the system, the microtubules, the brain, et cetera, biology in general, to organize or orchestrate these collapses, these objective reductions, to give consciousness, which is more like music, a symphony, than random noise. And that's exactly what biology does. And let me just say that also, this means that these collapses were occurring all along in the universe before there was life. And most people think that life happened and evolved, and then at a certain point of complexity, consciousness emerged out of a brain or some system, a biological system, to give consciousness. But that idea is full of holes. I mean, how do you get from a simple biological system through billions of years of no genes, and it's evolving to multicellular organisms? It doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense to me that consciousness, or at least proto-consciousness, was there first, and that life happened in order to access and take advantage of it, and is actually driven through evolution by feelings. That primitive systems would want to optimize, they needed a feedback fitness function instead of gene survival, because the genes don't feel as far as anybody can tell. So why would they care? What would be the motivation? But if a system has a feedback fitness function which makes it feel better, and since all biological experiments are basically based on reward of one form or another, whether it's hedonistic or spiritual or altruistic or whatever, feelings, pleasure, seeking pleasure, avoiding displeasure, is what's driving evolution. So I think consciousness, or at least proto-consciousness, came first, and life came along to optimize and orchestrate it.
Yeah, please.
Everything we've seen on Star Trek now.
Transporters aren't.
Beat me up, Scotty.
No, yeah, transporters aren't available yet. But no, I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, in the back.
Just tell me when they say, what does that mean?
Okay, well, that's kind of a slippery question by itself. A classical state is something that's hard and fast. Like if you have a billiard ball, it's just there. If you have something like a quantum system or a wave function, it can be smeared out. It can have multiple potential existences, and then when you finally measure it classically, it has to take a stand to become one of the possibilities. That's one way to look at it. One of the founders of quantum mechanics, Schrodinger, said the real key quality of quantum mechanics is what's called entanglement, which means what Einstein would call spooky action at a distance, where you have, when two particles interact and then separate, they somehow have a remembrance of that interaction. And then if you interrogate one of them, the other one suddenly, in a way, is correlated with that, or knows what happened to this one. So those are typical characteristics. Also, wave-like character, I think that's a nice one, but not necessarily essential. Okay. Yes, Darby.
Very brief questions. The first one is, it seemed like the sort of.
Darby, can you take off your mask so I can understand?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, the two questions. First one is, it seems like at least some of the sort of concerns that you have to do with the classical nature of AI algorithms. If we were to be able to run something like an AI algorithm on a quantum computer, is it possible to have the same kinds of quantum features that might show up in a neuron? And then the second question is there a blame element in the sort of precognition and retro,
There's a bling?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, do we blame the person who saw the boat explosion beforehand, or the boat that exploded? If there's retro causation, is it just that she had access to the explosion beforehand, or is there something about her seeing it that made it such that that was the event that happened?
Yeah. Okay. Both of those. Can you repeat the first question for everyone again?
Oh yeah. So the first question was just about whether we could
Build a quantum computer that does something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Okay.
I think that at some point, if there's a sufficiently complicated or complex quantum computer, it'll start producing answers before it's asked, and may end up being something like a quantum oracle, whereby we can get answers from the future about things we're interested in the present. Yeah. As for the second one, I guess I would appeal to Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if something, the person who does the precogging would probably have some subtle influences on the event itself, but may not be able to change the future. So, I mean, there's a big difference between when Patricia, or in particular, goes into one of her sessions. She is, she calms her mind down. She goes into her closet apparently and does some meditating and so on. And she's basically just barely registering anything at all. But when it happens, the information comes instantly. It's one of Stuart's Bing episodes where it is like a conscious event where all this stuff downloads instantly, is the way she describes it. It's almost as if she's living it at the moment, and then it's done. So Stuart kind of coined the term Bing in terms of consciousness, and I think it's not a bad term. And that would both indicate kind of this quantum collapse, which may be occurring.
Is Darby asking about the observer effect?
Yeah,
There's-
but there's a difference between a quantum observer and where you have a quantum system observing another quantum system, in which case both can be strongly changed by the observation, versus a person who's simply having a very light touch of their own mind somehow affecting something massive in the future. That's not going to necessarily have much of an effect at all, any more than me looking at you. That's a quantum process, but you don't get knocked over by the photons from me, and I don't get knocked over by the photons from you. We're just kind of at a short distance. So, yeah.
The question of consciousness and free will and the timing, I was wondering whether the brain systems that actually make the decisions that actually cause the action could involve the decision making and the free will, and it's only our awareness of it that comes milliseconds after.
Yeah, I'm not really enamored with the idea of free will. I can't prove it, or I'm agnostic with respect to it. I conduct my life as if I have it, but I'm not comfortable talking about it because I don't think there's good evidence for or against it. I think it's something you live by, but I don't know how to prove that. I think a better person to ask would be Darby. So.
I'm not a metaphysics person. I do ethics and epistemology.
Okay. Well, Stuart has strong feelings, it sounds like, about free will. I don't have strong ones about it myself. Stuart, what do you think?
Well, I would just say that the backward time effect gives you the possibility of free will, in that you can act in real time. So rather than your non-conscious inner zombie autopilot acting, and by the way, that's what people say, but there's no electrophysiological signal for that. That comes later, which we attribute to consciousness. But at least if it comes earlier due to retroactive effect, then we can act in real time as opposed to too late. You still face determinism. Was everything already scripted? And that's one that I don't think we can answer yet. And so I would say that the backward time gives us the possibility of free will and allows us to act in real time. But whether everything was scripted all along is a separate question. But without the backward time, then at least for rapid responses, free will is impossible. It comes too late, and that's sadly the party line in neuroscience. And there's a lot of evidence in neuroscience for retroactive effects that is willfully ignored because it's embarrassing and they don't want to deal with it. So that's why they're backed into this corner of consciousness being epiphenomenal and an illusion. The illusion being that we do have free will, or we do have the ability to act in real time, but we actually don't. It's an illusion. So backward time at least rescues consciousness from being an illusion, and gives the possibility of free will if we can figure out the determinism problem.
Yeah, and I think this is if you're looking at paradigm shifts in science, it would require a major kind of reevaluation for people to get away from their common sense notions about how time goes. But I think consciousness, for a lot of reasons, is pointing to a different conception of time, that it flows probably or operates in both directions. And Stuart's evidence is quite good, and I think the evidence for presentiment and precognition in general are almost unassailable. They're really quite good. So, and what they both point to is a quantum nature of the mind. So where that'll lead, I don't know, but it probably right now, the quantum, there have been a number of people fighting the idea that the mind can be quantum, but the stark evidence of backward influences seem to almost seal the deal there. So it's a matter of getting enough people thinking about it to figure out what's going on. Yes. Well, if you've ever experienced it, you don't doubt it. I don't think it doesn't have to be quiet. It can be quite strong. I mean, when it came to the premonition of my brother's death, it was quite visceral. Never had a feeling like that before or since. So, yeah, it depends on the situation. Well, it usually happens when my mind is idling, which is quite a bit. Okay, I'm most productive when I'm staring at a blank wall. So, yeah.
How closely to quantum computer?
Right. Well, I mean, riffing off what Stuart has to say, if you really, if the mind is truly a quantum computer and you start getting entanglements between the various bits of tubulin in microtubules, and then expand that to the size of a human brain, the computational ability probably, well, would make it a computer of virtually infinite computational processing. When you're doing quantum computing, if you have one bit, you have a 1 and a 0. If you have 2 bits, you have 1, you have 4. If you have 3 bits, you have 8, and you double if you're just looking at them in straight bits. So there's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and that's only 10 bits. If you had 10 to the 15th bits, you're looking at 2 to the 10 to the 15th power, which is a fairly large number, isn't it, Cameron? Yeah. So we don't know. We simply don't know, but it's clear that something interesting is going on in consciousness, and I think it is indicating new kinds of physics that we need to investigate. I think that's the main takeaway here from both, and consciousness almost certainly has something to do with consciousness. We're not sure what and how deeply it goes. Yeah.
I don't know if this is right, but I just kind of put together what they're thinking. It seems almost like you need to have classical physics for an observer to understand. It's something to understand. But then you need to have the observer. You also have the quantum effects, right? That's sort of like the whole universe needs both. You're going to have an observer observing the universe, because we need the big scale stuff that you can understand, and then but it only can happen if you have the quantum effects in the brain.
Possible, yeah. Susie, you want to finish?
Finish up? Oh, I think, yeah. Okay, well, thank you both for coming and for giving
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Hey, you're very welcome. It was a great session. I enjoyed it myself. So thanks a lot. Good luck to you.
Maybe we can have him back.